join me in a word of opening prayer. Our Father in heaven, you've been so good to us, and we're so thankful for all the blessings that you give us, things that we don't even notice. There are so many of them. We're thankful, Lord, that we have a place to come to tonight, that we can study your word openly, that we can discuss the teachings, and that we can all grow closer to you and have a better understanding of how you'd have us to live. Thank you, Lord, for Jesus, for his willingness to come down and suffer and teach us how we should live, but to sacrifice for us because we know that we're not going to make it as perfectly as he did. We ask, Father, that you bless us and help us to grow stronger and more able to battle temptation and sin as we are encountering it. Help us to be more like Jesus every day. Lord, be with those who are not able to be out because they're sick, because they're shut in, they're battling difficult times. We're also thankful, Father, for those that have been able to return to us from surgeries and illness. Thankful for those that are traveling, that have been brought back safe to us. Lord, we just ask you watch over us and keep us in your care. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I've not quite got the timing right. 2 weeks ago I was a little short on information, and then last week I was had too much information for the time. So there is one thing I want to kind of go back to before we jump into the lesson tonight, and that is found in Proverbs, the 4th chapter. And really it's the end of chapter 4, but I wanted to kind of read it, and then I wanted to kind of mention it for a second. So if you look at Proverbs chapter 4, beginning in verse 23, it says, "Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put perverse lips far from you. Let your eyes look straight ahead, and your eyelids look right before you. Ponder the path of your feet, and let all your ways be established. Do not turn to the right or the left. Remove your foot from evil." Now, besides the fact that you've read that recently, and you've probably read that a lot before, that sound familiar to you at all? Watch your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your hands, your feet. Watch your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your hands, your feet. We teach the littlest kids that proverb. Watch where your eyes are. Watch where your hands are. Watch what your heart's doing. Watch where your feet are going. And so don't ever not sing that song when we sing it with the kids, because it's not just a great catchy tune for the kids and a fun bunch of motions. It is the wisdom of God being put out for us. Matt, do you have a thought?
Along the same lines, just as you were reading that, it struck me that it is the opposite of the 6 things the Lord hates in Proverbs 6, 16 through 19. Because there is in the mouth and the hands and the feet and the heart, except there they are doing things, and that's really strong language. The Lord hates these things.
Yeah, we don't hear the Lord hates something all that much, but we got 7 of them there, and you're exactly right. It's the opposite of what the instruction that's being given here is. And so it's important for us to recognize that, because it is, like I said, we teach the kids that, but we need to make sure that when we teach the kids that, we also teach them that there is a truth behind that. It's not just a catchy tune, right? We're not just rolling the gospel chariot. We're not just, those things all have spiritual teachings to them. And we want to make sure that we want the kids to love it. We want the kids to enjoy it. We want them to just have joy with it. But we also want them to get the teaching from it. And we need to get the teaching from it. So that's all important for us to do. Any other thoughts on that before we jump into this week? I'd have felt really bad if I didn't get my VBS song in for this class. Okay, so now we're kind of We're kind of teetering on the edge. We're wrapping up the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, which is kind of this nice summary that we talked about last week. And we're kind of stepping out into the Proverbs of Solomon. But tonight, we're gonna look at some character studies out of Proverbs chapter 7. And in Proverbs 7, what we get is the story of a particular young man and a particular woman. And their interaction is a model for what not to do. And so if we look at Proverbs 7 and we start looking in verse 6, and for those of you who have Bibles like mine with little titles in front of the sections, mine is called the Crafty Harlot. That's the term, right? Crafty Harlot, which is, certainly not a flattering term, right? And but it is a great title, right? So I looked up the word crafty, and it said it involves the making of decorative objects and other things by hand. Okay, that's probably not the right definition. So I looked at the one underneath it, and it said clever at achieving one's aims by indirect or deceitful methods. There you go. Now we know what we're getting at, right? Somebody who's good at tricking people into getting what they want. And I think that's a pretty accurate description for the story that we're going to look at here. Because there are things about both parties in this story that we want to notice as we go through it. And so I'm going to actually read parts of it and then kind of pause for a second. But let's start here in verse 6. It says, "From the window of my house I looked through my lattice and I saw among the simple, I perceived among the youths a young man devoid of understanding, passing along the street near her corner. And he took the path to her house in the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night." I'm going to stop right there for a second. Because I want to talk about this person, this guy, this young person, this simple person. What is he doing? Sort of, right? I mean, when you first see him, he's out there in a crowd of people, right? And then he's going to kind of wander off. And the thing that I think we want to notice here is, which way does he take to wherever he's going? Where's he go? Near her house, right? He took the path to her door. So apparently, this is not an unfamiliar path. This is not something that, that if you ask the wise men of the city and say, where's this street go, that they're not going to be able to point something out to you about that. Yes, ma'am.
Idea that he's flirting with danger and seeing how close to the line he can get.
And I think you're right. It's either that or he really is devoid of understanding and he's just wandering and hasn't even given a thought to it. But I kind of tend to think that you are right. He's kind of heading in a place that he knows probably shouldn't be. There's probably other ways to get wherever he's going, but he's going this way. And so he's following her path. And the thing about it is, go ahead, Landon.
To Carolyn's point, the time also. He's picked his place and his time. The fact that he's simple may indicate that he's simple, but we've got all these details. So the whole picture may be that he knows what he's after. He may not be able to see beyond what he wants right now to see how badly this is going to end up for him.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think when, so often, and it's not just this particular sin, right? But so often, how do we get ourselves in trouble? Right? Kind of someplace we probably hadn't ought to be. Maybe, hanging out with people we hadn't ought to be hanging out with. Al?
And he was apparently alone, so he didn't have another person to say, are you sure we ought to be doing this?
Yeah, Al said, he's by himself, so nobody else is going to tap him on the shoulder and say, is this a good idea? Lee, did you have a thought?
No, I was just flipping my glasses, but I was flipping it over to the page reading of the passage. In chapter 9, it says that person is simple. To me, that means they don't want to understand. They just take things as they come. Everything belongs to them. I go take it.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, simple, when we talked last week about the simple person, it's kind of a decision point person that hasn't maybe made up their mind or has kind of started down a path but hasn't committed to it. But it could also be somebody who's just not interested in complicated things, right? It's all about me and what I want. So that could be true. Lauren, did you have a thought?
And I think part of it too is that this is a simple man who is young. We've had conversations recently with our kids about just because you don't see what the consequences are, don't assume that there aren't any. And if I tell you don't do this thing, that's probably because there are consequences you don't know are there. And I think part of what we're looking at here is a man who says, it's cool, I got it, I'm fine, it'll be fine, it'll work out, because he doesn't see the consequences down the road.
Yeah, and not seeing the consequences is the prime reason for the book of Proverbs, right? I mean, that's the whole story is, here's somebody saying, you don't see it, but I've been there, I've seen it. I don't need you to see it. I can give you the, it's kind of like the old joke, I looked at the back of the Bible and I saw the end and God wins, right? You don't have to go through all this stuff. I've seen the ending. I've read the last page. I know what happens here. You don't have to do it. And all through Proverbs, even in the stuff that we've read so far, we get that same instruction. Back in Proverbs 2, it talks about discretion and understanding are there to deliver you from those who leave the path of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness. There's another one in chapter 2 talking about, the immoral woman says her path leads to death. So it's not like even at this point, this briefly into the study of Proverbs that we haven't been warned over and over again, watch your feet where you go. Because it's all over the place there. And even in chapter 6 and verses 27 and 28, it took kind of to Carolyn's point at the very beginning, right? Can a man take fire into his bosom and not be burned? Right? How close can I get to the flame before something catches on fire? How close can I get to that before there is an effect on me? And that is kind of the implication that we get from this individual that is going this path and has taken this step. And so it's hard to give instruction in a modern context to this, and depending on where you live, right? I mean, in my neighborhood, and probably in most neighborhoods now, you don't necessarily cross into different parts of the city between here and Kroger, right? Some places you do, some places you don't, and you're in a car, you're not walking out on your own, right? But the idea here is decisions you make and places you go and paths that you take have consequences. And so, the instruction here, while it sounds, very quaint back in the days when everything was right there in the city and you were walking around to it, it has relevance to us now in the same way. The other thing to notice here is that, when we get down to the end of chapter 26, is what we're going to find out is, you can't walk on hot coals and not sear your feet. You can't get close to a fire and not get burned. You might do it once, you might do it twice, but if you do it, the consequence will show up, and particularly as it relates to sinful behavior. At the end of the chapter where it talks about this woman, it says she has cast down many wounded, and all who were slain by her were strong men. And the impression there is, don't fool yourself. Don't lie to yourself that I'm tough enough to handle it. I can walk this path and it won't affect me. That is not the way it works. And that's not the way I hate to spoil the story this early in the class, but that's not the way this story ends either, right? So, that's the first thing. The second thing is, what's he, we've established what he's doing, and we've kind of started on this second thing, is what's he thinking? He's devoid of understanding. He's not. He's not thinking. And that's kind of the thing, right? Even if he's tempted, even if he's like, I can go this way, right? He's not thinking it all the way through because he doesn't have understanding to guide him out of the paths of darkness. So his whole thing is, not understanding that. And ultimately, in chapter 5, it says people will die for the lack of instruction. The consequences can be severe. Rufus.
He's following his hormones.
Yeah.
He's most likely his description fits a teenage young man or teenager, and he's following his hormones.
Yeah.
And hey, I know she's there, and so I'll just journey there and see what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's true. And so let's find out what he runs into. So verse 10 says, there a woman met him with the attire of a harlot and a crafty heart. She was loud and rebellious. Her feet would not stay at home. At times she was outside, at times in the open square, lurking at every corner. So she caught him and kissed him, and we'll go on there for a second. But what's she doing? Making trouble, absolutely. Working the street, that's a nice way of putting it. Absolutely true, right?
Dr. Clifford talked about, snakes. And so she's kind of like a snake just laying there in the grass, and as he's coming by, she's going to reach out and touch him.
Yeah, right near when with the unsuspecting one, right? I'll tell you what she's doing. She's executing a plan, right? I mean, the way this is described is she's crafty, right? Sometimes she's in the open square, sometimes she's in the shadows, she's here, she's there, but she's dressed the part. And she is advertising her intention, and that is entirely designed not for her benefit in the immediate sense, but to be appealing and exciting to the person that she's trying to capture, right? This is the look that she's trying to go, and it says she's dressed as a harlot, so we have that appeal to the sense, right? To Dr. Clifford saying, we got a young man here who's following his hormones, right? He's not thinking, but he wants to see that. And for years we've talked about men, men are visually, oriented, right? And this is all about presenting that up there. And the thing about it is, none of that is known to this young man who does not know her paths, who does not know what the consequence of all this is going to do. And so we know what she's doing, and we know that she's crafty, but she's also loud and rebellious. So what's the attraction of the rebellious part? Oh, she seems like a lot of fun, right? And she seems very different from the typical person that he's hanging out with, right? We talk to our young children, not even our young children, we talk to our teenagers, and we talk to our 20-somethings and older than that, right? When they get the bit from the people that they're going to associate with, oh, you bunch of churchgoers. Oh, you've never been to a bar in your life. Oh, you don't know what real fun is, right? She is not going to listen to her parents, and she is not going to listen to her boss, and she is not going to be told what she's going to do. And boy, doesn't that sound appealing, right, to a young man. So she's got kind of the whole package, and she's lurking. What's a lurk? When you lurk, what are you doing? I'm sorry? Yeah, you're sneaking around, right? You're out there with a bad purpose in mind. You're lying in wait for a victim, Proverbs 23 talks about. All of that is going on here. And then the last part of this, which I think is interesting, it says that she is impudent. She is disrespectful. She is immodest, right? So not only is she rebellious, but she's not afraid to tell you about it and tell you what's wrong with those people who are trying to tell you the right thing to do. She probably has some real choice words about that Solomon guy, right? That guy, you need to not listen to him. What a troublemaker he is, right? So she's got all of that going on, and she's really good at flattery. She's really good at telling you what you want to hear. So let's look at what she says there. It says, verse 13, she caught him and kissed him. With an impudent face, she said to him, I have peace offerings with me. Today I've paid my vows, so I came out to meet you, diligently to seek your face, and I have found you. I have spread my bed with tapestry. I have colored coverings of English linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh and aloes and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love until the morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. For my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He has taken a bag of money with him and will come home at the appointed time. Wow. She came looking for him. Just had made a plan. Going to go get him. Nobody else, just him. Doesn't that sound good? Doesn't that sound, how many of you guys are completely secure? Right? You have no insecurities about your looks or your weight or your height or your ability to perform work or your intelligence or, your eyebrows are too close. I mean, nobody here has any insecurities, right? That's good, because I need to talk to y'all. I have some problems. But she is not seeing any of that, right? Because that is, you are the one that I came to find, right? Doesn't that sound good? Doesn't that just scratch the itch? Right? That's what she's doing. And chapter 3 says her lips, or chapter 5 rather, in Proverbs says her lips drip honey. Right? It is so sweet to listen to this person talk to you because she is talking right at you about everything that is right about you. And suddenly, she doesn't seem that bad. Well, all that talk I heard about her, that's probably not right. She's a pretty nice person. She thinks I'm a nice person, so it's okay, right? And then from there, she's going to take away all the other concerns, right? First of all, this stuff about paying her vows. So one of the commentaries, and it kind of makes sense to me, if you think about the ceremonial law, right? When you go pay a peace offering, you're supposed to take the leftovers and you're supposed to consume them that day, right? So she's got meat with her that has to be eaten today. Matt, do you have a thought?
Shows her contempt for God. This is somebody who is going to, like, the temple. She's standing before the altar. And as she's there, she's plotting adultery. She's plotting how she's going to cheat on her husband. And in telling her intended victim all of this, she's just saying, oh, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. That's just an act that we go through. Now let's get down to what's really important. Let's have some fun.
Yeah, and that's exactly right? She says, hey, I've paid my peace offerings. I've checked that box, right? So I'm good. And, oh, by the way, we can't put this off because because it's really important that I keep the ceremonial piece of the law. It's really important that I eat this meat tonight. And there's a lot of it, so I'm going to need somebody to help me. And that's why I came looking for you, right? So we're going to eat this. And, I have this really great setup at home. Everything's set up just right. And my husband, don't worry about him. He's out of town. He's out of town, and he took a bag of money with him, so he's going to be gone a while. So don't worry about the husband. And she's just laying it out for him, right? And you think about that picture to somebody who hasn't thought this through, and now it's really sounding good, right? No consequence, no problem. We're going to have a really good time. And to Matt's point, now you start to think about sharing that contempt for God and just start thinking about, there's no rules here. Let's just go have some fun. And so she has really laid this out for him, beautifully. It's a soft, comfortable place. We got food. We're going to be all alone. It is nice and safe. And so, yes, sir.
Responsibility.
No responsibility.
Him, and with what she's presented, I get everything I want, and either after or in the morning I leave, and I never have to have any obligation to this person ever again.
Yeah, she makes it as easy as it can be, right? Absolutely true. And so, there's never a consequence there. So what happens? Verse 21, with her enticing speech, she caused him to yield. With her flattering lips, she seduced him. Immediately he went after her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till an arrow struck his liver, and as a bird hastens to the snare, he did not know it would cost his life. So it's all fun and games until the bill comes due, right? And you never know when the bill's going to come due. You never know when the husband's business is over a day early, right? You never know when something or another about what you're doing is going to get found out. And even if nobody else finds it out, and Proverbs we talked about in the last couple of weeks, isn't particularly a discussion of heavenly consequence, but there is a lot of in there that God notices everything that we're doing, and God knows what we're doing, and so there is absolutely consequence. And here it says it's going to cost him his life. I like some of the other phrases that are in chapters 5 and 6. It talks about lost years, your flesh and your body are consumed, you're on the verge of ruin. And then this just sticks with me for some reason. Chapter 6, verse 26, for by means of a harlot a man is reduced to a crust of bread. That's it. That's what you got left. After this, no harm, no responsibility, no foul experience, there's nothing left of you. And you are consumed, which is kind of the thing. Now, James chapter 1 teaches us the same thing. Right? James chapter 1 says, every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. And when lust is conceived, it brings forth sin, and sin, when it's finished, brings forth death. Right? That's the process here that's being described in this very story. The young man that's his lust, right? He's enticed. And then they go ahead and they move forward and commit the sin, and then when the sin is finished, it brings forth death. Right? In a literal sense in this story. But, James is obviously talking about spiritual things here. And I think one of the important things that we need to do here is let's step back from this specific sin of adultery. And let's talk about sin in general. Because that's what James is talking about. Right? I mean, you may be sitting and listening to this and going, I have no problem with sexual immorality. That is, maybe it's drinking, right? Maybe it's temper. Maybe it's whatever it is that is your particular lust that the devil's going to use to draw you away and entice you. I mean, this story is great about adultery, but adultery could just be, a metaphor for any kind of sin, because the sin operates the same way. Lauren.
And it's so easy for me to sit here and laugh at the young man. Oh, what an idiot. Doesn't he know? Can't he see? What is his problem? I am the young man.
Yeah.
My vice might be something else, but I am the one that God is saying there going, what is wrong with you? Have we not done this before? Do you not understand?
Yeah.
Get it together, just like I'm talking to this young man lacking understanding.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. I am the young man, because that is exactly the point, right? Is it may not be adultery, it may be something else, but I am the young man, because we're all set up like this. We're all set up to be presented with the thing we want in order to have us to reject God. I think Al and then Lee.
I was going to say it makes me think of a get-rich-quick scheme, gambling, where something that you want and it really appeals to you, can really lead to big problems.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, drop adultery and fill in the thing that's really appealing to you, right? And plug that in, and the details of the story change, but the process doesn't. Lee.
Verse 13 says that she looked at him with an impudent face, which means she didn't give him the respect that he deserved. That's the same way Satan is to us. Satan looks at us and he doesn't give us the respect we deserve. He wants us to be as miserable as this woman wants. He wants to entrap us and bring us in. He doesn't care. He looks at everyone that way.
Yeah, and Lee said, this is really important. Lee said she looked at him impudently. She didn't give him the respect that he deserves, and that's exactly how Satan looks at us. He doesn't offer us any respect, and he just wants to drag you along with that. And I think that's absolutely true. That's absolutely something that we need to grasp hold of. Yes, sir.
Just sitting here, it just reminds me more and more and more that we need to be telling this to our teenagers.
Yeah. Rufus's point is we got to teach our teenagers this stuff, and that is so true, right? Because and they honestly, we need to teach it to them before they're teenagers, because once they're teenagers, we don't know nothing, right? But we need to continue to teach them that, but we got to get the principle instilled in them, and we got to take advantage of opportunities where there might be a real life example in their life where you say, this is kind of like how sin works, and take them through that discussion so that they have some sort of familiarity with it. Did somebody here have a comment? I thought I saw a hand. Maybe not. Okay. I do think, the other part of this too is, I've lost my spot. Hang on here for a second. Yeah, chapter 5 and verse 22 and 23 says that his own iniquities will trap the wicked man, and he is caught in the cords of his sin. That's a really true statement too. The thing about this story in particular and sin in general is, in the end, it's nobody's fault but mine, right? I'm not going to be able to argue with God on the judgment day. I'm not going to be able to argue with my parents or my neighbors or whoever, my wife, when the bill comes due. I might be able to argue with them, but it's not going to carry any weight because it was my choice. It was my decision that took me where, the bill comes due. And whatever that is, then that's where we're going to have to be. Let me turn it around for a second. Because, for 2 weeks I feel like I've beaten the drum of the immoral woman. What if it's a man? Does this story apply to men like it applies to women? Absolutely. And you know how I know that? Because Proverbs tells me. the exact same things. If you look at the characteristics of this woman, and you go back and look at chapter 6 and read verses 12 through 15, listen to what the wicked man does. He walks with a perverse mouth. He winks with his eyes. He shuffles his feet. He points with his fingers. Perversity is in his heart. He devises evil continually. He sows discord. He makes a plan, and he executes it toward an end. Right? And so young women, you can be the simple person devoid of understanding as well. Right? Probably not in the same way. Most men dressing up and, whatever the male equivalent of a harlot would be, probably not all that appealing, right? But a real sympathetic friend, to a married woman, your husband doesn't understand you. I understand you, right? That kind of appeal is very real. Landon.
When I had an opportunity to teach high school class and we talk about this, for a young man, it usually is the physical desire. But for a young woman, sometimes it can be more the feeling of self-worth, that she's worth this young man who she thinks actually cares about her. She's worth him paying attention to her. Nobody else has ever paid attention to her. When the whole time he's playing the role of the woman in the story that we're talking about tonight. It's just he's after something else from her, and he's setting up a trap for her in a different way. It's the same thing. Both individuals are crafty.
Yeah, and Landon's exactly right. I mean, it may not be the physical, although, a really young, good-looking man, approaches you at work and starts to become your good friend, and you guys start talking, and it could go that way, right? But it could just be kind of a self-worth thing or whatever it is, right? That is, the tools are just different, right? So, that's the thing that we got to catch on to, and that applies, again, Landon talked about teaching the high school class, but that applies to everybody in this room, right? If we're working, if we're volunteering somewhere or whatever, that very same situation on either side of the man or the woman's thing, can be there. And you know what? Flattery works with women too. I don't know if that's a news flash for you, but you can flatter women just like women flatter men. It might be harder because we're not very good at it, but it works because I'll be we're all insecure. We all like to hear ourselves talked up, and so some of the tools are the same. Landon.
It talks about how this young man is unfamiliar with her ways, and you just mentioned how it would be different for us than it would be for a high school class. But the thing about it is when you go through life, you think about 10 years. After you've been through your 30s, you want to have 10 years worth of experience, not 1 year's worth of experience 10 times. So you want to get past the point of being unfamiliar with these ways, be familiar with them, and start to be proactive in your thoughts and think about what are the guardrails that I'm setting up for myself here so that I don't lie to myself, believe my own lie, and then find somebody else who will lie to me too and believe their lie and get into a situation that I don't need to be in.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Tim.
And we live in a time, kind of like the time of the Judges, or maybe before the flood. There was a man a little older than me when I was in college, and looking back, he was kind of grooming me, if you will. Go places, buy you gifts. I've seen it happen to young men. Even recently, I've got a nephew that had to, where there are men, gay men, that are grooming and seducing young men, and they're not even aware it's happening.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, Tim, because in our world today, right, and it's like you said, it's not new, but it's prevalent, right? That same thing with, an older person and a younger person, and it doesn't have to be the opposite sex. It's just, it is, to use the word that they use, and Tim's right, it's grooming, right? We're trying to get to a position where, just like the woman, is flattering the man, just like the man is telling your husband doesn't understand you, the older man's telling him your parents don't understand you. I understand you, and it's the same trick. It's the same trick. And the story details change, but nothing else does. And that's where I think the flattery thing, and to Landon's point, right, how do you have 10 years experience and not 1 year experience 10 times? How does that happen? Because you think. Because you think and you learn, right? And you learn, and you study and you learn and you internalize and you learn, so that when some complete stranger comes up to you in Las Vegas and is suddenly thinks you're like really cute, right? And you're off on a business trip, well, you know what? Wait a minute. I seem to remember this story. And so I need to be careful. Let me go here and I'll come back to you.
Me?
Yes, sir.
And none of us should ever think that we're beyond this or above this. I am reminded of probably the most interesting Bible study I've ever had in my life, with a gentleman who obeyed the gospel as a young man and then went way, way, way off the deep end. I met him when he was about 70. Absolute best ladies man I've ever met in my life. That I, as a human being, am devoid of charm. But he could walk into the auditorium. He eventually did repent and was restored to fellowship. And the guy could walk into the auditorium and just have the right sparkle in his eye and just the right jokes to tell. And could have these 60-year-old women just laughing at him. Just remarkable for people who understand that and know how to do that, and how anybody could be vulnerable. Not that he meant anything by that point, just that he still knew how.
Yeah, and I think Matt's right. And I think, you can look at tonight's discussion in a couple of different ways. You can say this is simple stuff, right? This is really simple. Why are we spending Bible class time on this? But you know what? It's really important. And there's 500 ways this story gets told, and it follows exactly the same pattern. And maybe it's not you, but maybe it's your friend, maybe it's your cousin, maybe it's your kid, right? But we need to watch out for us. We need to watch out for one another, and we need to be to Al's point, when we see the young man starting to walk down the path, say, hey, come here a minute. Why don't you go that way? That would be a much better way to go. You don't want to go that way. And that's a conversation that we need to be able to have. And honestly, the practical advice to all of this is probably less applicable to the single community, if I put it that way. But from the married community standpoint, Landon passed a song on to me from a guy, and the title of his song is "Water Your Own Yard," right? If the other guy's grass looks greener, water your own yard, right? And that's really the advice that's given to us in Proverbs. In Proverbs 5, it talks about, drink water from your own cistern, right? It's the same idea, right? Which is you have a spouse, and so before you start investing all this time and energy on something else, why don't you invest that time and energy in your spouse, and you're going to get a better result, right? And so, being true is the part of it that is important here. And I think the thing that's described about the woman, and I'm trying to find the place here where it specifically talks about it. You know, in Proverbs 9, she says, stolen water is sweet and bread eaten in secret is pleasant, right? That's the excitement factor. But Proverbs also says this is a person who has forgotten her covenant to her husband and her covenant to her God. You know, and so, you know, the Proverbs remind us that nothing we do is without some sort of a covenant relationship that we are being measured against, right? God has offered a covenant to us that we have to either disregard or conform to. Lauren.
And with that, and to Al's point as well, I think part of what I take from this discussion is I have to be willing to hear someone who says, hey, go that way instead. I have to be and I have to figure out how to teach my kids to be willing to hear that voice as well. That somewhere in there, I have to figure out how to teach my kids that even though you're almost a teenager and I've become stupid overnight, listen to the people around you who give you, because that's part of how you get past the lack of understanding.
That's right.
As you listen to the smart people around you.
Yeah, and Lauren's absolutely right. We got to be able to know it for ourselves, and we got to be able to teach it, and we got to be able to point people to other people who will teach it. That when people won't listen to us, and I try to listen to my wife when she says they'll remember, they will remember. I know it doesn't seem like they're going to, but they will remember. I'm like, well, I hope you're right. Next week, go ahead, Landon. I'll let you.
The verses you mentioned in Proverbs 5 about drinking from your own well are so important because when you read Proverbs, the fool and the wise man, they're both men. They have the same basic desires. The only problem is the fool has misdirected his desires and he's misplaced value on things that are worthless. And so a lot of Proverbs is trying to get you to choose to point those desires in the right direction and value things that are really valuable. And so when you talk about your wife, you know, all of Proverbs is avoid alcohol and avoid loose women. And in Proverbs Chapter 5, the instruction is flipped completely, which is to be drunk, intoxicated with your wife's love. To take all that desire that you have, don't deny that it's there. Just redirect it, point it in the right direction, and make her the object of it. And so it's just really fascinating to kind of think about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We're over time, so we're going to wrap up. Next week, we're going to talk about two things: the lazy person, and how being the lazy person kind of interrupts the quest for righteousness. If you've read this week's reading, you see all over the place the value of righteous, the value of the righteous. These good things come to the righteous. So what does that quest look like, and what does being lazy look like? So that's next week. Thank y'all.